Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Thank you so much, as always, for being here. Got a great show lined up for you today. We are primarily going to be talking about some comments from Josh Jacobs that had everyone in a social media frenzy. We'll talk about those in just a moment. Before we get there, just a couple pieces of news and notes. First of all, if you're listening to this on Thursday, members only Q&A coming up at 1:30 p.m. Central Time today. So make sure to check that out. Also, happy hour coming up at 3 p.m. Central Time on Friday. So make sure to check that out as well. If you've not checked out memberships yet, you can definitely do so still. Plenty of time to get signed up. And that will get you access to the Q&A. Should have some time to do a little bit of bonus content this week as well. Early access to videos, lots of other perks that are out there and available to you as well. So again, make sure to check those out. But Q&A, 1:30 p.m. today for members, 3 p.m. for everyone, happy hour. And I do open up the Q&A for members to everyone once the actual Q&A itself is done. So if anyone wants to go out and view that, they can certainly do so as well. A couple pieces of news before we get into today's main topic. The Rams are going to play a game in Australia in 2026, which I guess is somewhat noteworthy in and of itself. However, it's a little bit more noteworthy in the fact that there is a small, very small chance that it could involve the Green Bay Packers. The Rams, of course, will have, their 9 home games that year. One of those will be in Australia. And they, while not set to play Green Bay per se, will face one NFC North team at home in that season. And it is possible that that team could be Green Bay. So it's not completely within like a crazy realm of possibility, right? It's not going to be, even if Green Bay is the team that faces them, and that they are the NFC North team that goes against the Rams, there's still only one of 9 teams that could theoretically get matched up with them in Australia. And it would seem probably a little bit soon for them to go. They just did the Brazil thing. It would probably seem a little bit soon for them to be the ones that were picked for Australia. So I don't think it would happen, but I will just throw it out there. It's not completely impossible that it could happen, that the Packers could face the Rams in Brazil again. That would be 2026, not 2025, but 2026. The other thing that's starting to get talked about a little bit more is the 18-game season in the NFL. And of course, the NFL Players Association, no, nobody wants an 18-game season. Don't do it. We hate it. The NFL is, we're going to probably get to an 18-game season eventually. And we all know how this is going to play out. The NFL is going to want 18 games. They're going to get 18 games. The players will give concessions on, probably the 18th game in order to get more additional revenue and more money. And this is how it usually works. There's a give and take, and the NFL will erase a preseason game. My bet is they're willing to give an extra bye week as well. So they're going to go to the players and say, we're going to get you a little bit more money. We're going to give you an extra bye week. We're going to eliminate a preseason game. And my guess is that probably ultimately gets the job done. I don't know for sure. I have taken a full 180 on this. When they were at 16 games and it was getting ready to go 17 games, I thought it was absurd at the time of like, who doesn't want to trade a preseason game for a regular season game? Why would anyone want more preseason games than regular season games? And I still think, probably 4 preseason games was too many. I think, 2 to 3. I think 3 is probably the right number, to be honest. But adding that 17th game has been less enjoyable than I expected. And what I mean by that is, we are getting more and more into games at the end of the season where there's a ton of games, largely, sometimes 10, maybe even 11 games by those final couple weeks that just have no stakes, nothing to play for. They're just basically extra preseason games. I don't hate it. It's not like I am completely against it. If it were me and I had to say go to 16 or go to 18, I would probably be more of a proponent of going to 16, which is stunning to me. I actually think this is one of those weird scenarios where less is actually more. And if I would have been debating with Andy about this, myself about this before the change got made, I would have, past Andy would have called current Andy crazy. Never in a million years would I have expected to say that. But I actually think that it has watered down the amount, just the product a little bit. I think, again, it's a weird scenario where less is a little bit more. Listen, I love football. I am not going to turn it down. I am not one of these people that's going to be upset by it. I'll be all right, 18 games, probably 2 preseason games. We'll make the adjustments. We'll move on. But I think I'm actually a little bit more on the I like 16 games more than 17 or 18. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. It probably doesn't matter what right now the NFL Players Association thinks. This is probably going to get to 18 games at some point in time, probably during the next CBA. Again, if I had to guess, I would guess that they're going to go to 2 preseason games, 18 regular season games, and 2 bye weeks to give a little bit more extra rest with that 18 game schedule. That would be my guess. If they are going to do it that way, what I would love to see is to make sure you have a bye before your Thursday night game. Either you played the previous Thursday night, so you played Thursday to Thursday. Like if you played Thanksgiving, you could play the next Thursday, for example, or you have a bye week before any sort of Thursday game. That would, I think, make some of those issues with, playing on a 4-day rest or whatever, a little bit better. So that would be one thing I would like to see if they get to 2 bye weeks per team. All right, let's get to our main topic for today. And that is, of course, Josh Jacobs on Radio Row in New Orleans, talking the Green Bay Packers. He talked to the game in Milwaukee. He talked to Kay Adams. He talked to NBC Sports and had some interesting comments to say. And again, these got everyone worked up to some extent, either worked up of what he said or worked up because people were worked up because of what he said. And this is just how we are as a humanity right now. Everyone's always upset or talking about something or what somebody else said at some point at all times. It's just the nature of things, right? So what we had from Josh Jacobs, I kind of want to go through these one by one. The first one is there was a question of, do you think the Packers need to add a piece? And he said, I think we need like 3. And he went on to say, and again, these are sort of split between interviews here, but he went on to say, I think we need another defensive end. I think we need another defensive back. And I think we need a wide receiver, a real wide receiver. And I want to touch base on that piece of it right there. He got cut off at the end of it. This was in the NBC interview, and it looked like he was going to say a real wide receiver 1. All right. And then it just came across though as like real wide receiver. It was tough to kind of tell because again, he did get cut off. He would later go on to say, quote, I love the guys we have in the receiving room. They all have the potential to be one, meaning a number 1, but we need a guy that's proven to be 1. Proven to be a number 1 is what he's saying here. He went on to say, we've got a really young group of receivers. All can be really, really, really special. But I think personally, we need a guy that's proven to be a number 1 already. So somebody that we know is going to be a little bit more consistent. There's more, but I want to start with those things right there. That's, I think, the crux of what Josh Jacobs said, the crux of what had people talking about exactly this, right? The first thing I will say is, on the surface, what did he say? I think we need to add 3 pieces: defensive end, defensive back, a wide receiver, right? Now he said real wide receiver 1. But let's just touch base on that easy aspect of it. He's saying what everyone has said. We did our video a couple weeks back of Green Bay's biggest needs going into the offseason. And what we talked about on that were wide receiver, offensive lineman, pass rusher, and corner. And I ranked it. I know I had pass rusher first. I had corner, I believe, second. I think I had offensive line third, and I had wide receiver fourth. But I said, to me, pass rushers first, and then take the corner, the wide receiver, and the offensive line, and put them in any order that you want. And then we did 10 other ones. In fact, I probably have the notes here somewhere as well. Is to regards to that exact 10. Now that I'm thinking about it. Biggest offseason needs. Here it is. So I had number 10, developmental lottery ticket quarterback, number 9, blocking tight end, number 8, returner, number 7, linebacker depth / competition, number 6, kicker, number 5, run stopping defensive tackle, number 4 was wide receiver, number 3, offensive line depth / competition, number 2 was corner, and then number 1 was pass rush. And again, I basically said after number 1, those 2, 3, 4, if you wanted to put them in any order, if you wanted wide receiver 2, if you wanted corner 3 or whatever you wanted to do, I was fine with that. My biggest one I thought was pass rush. And then I thought 2, 3, 4 in some order were corner, offensive line, and wide receiver. But he's saying what everyone else has been saying, that corner, wide receiver, pass rush are the 3 biggest needs. He didn't go offensive line here. So he didn't say that. And I don't necessarily blame him for that, which is actually noteworthy here, right? because he's the one that's working behind that offensive line. And maybe that would have been a little bit of a different connotation if he's like, yeah, we need 2 or 3 more offensive linemen. Like maybe that would have, because he's running behind those guys, or maybe he just has their backs, whatever. But he did not say offensive line, which I guess, from a running back's point of view is interesting. He seemingly is good with Walker and Jenkins. And I don't know if his assumption is that Myers is going to be gone or not, but Sean Ryan, Jordan Morgan, Zach Tom, seems like he's good with that group. But his list is pretty much echoing everyone's lists that are out there. Now, the wording of a real wide receiver 1, right, is a little bit interesting. I don't even know that this needs to be brought into like super great detail here. I understand where that could be viewed as maybe, well, none of our guys are real number ones. None of our guys are capable of being that alpha number 1 wide receiver. And he went on, of course, to say, I love the guys we have in the receiving room. They have all the potential to be a 1, but we need a guy that's a proven 1. I don't think that personally is all that controversial. I think he's saying, hey, we need a proven guy in that room, and everyone else still has all that potential to eventually be that guy and to grow into that. But we can go out and get that guy right now and still have those players develop behind him. I don't think that's anything too crazy. And I kind of like the challenge that he's throwing out there. So to me, he's just kind of saying it as it is. And it kind of felt to me that this was sort of just a fun day on Radio Row for Josh Jacobs, and he's just casually talking, just like kind of you and I would be doing. We need a wide receiver 1. We need a more depth in the secondary. We need a pass rusher. He's just kind of going over the things that he thinks they need. I I kind of low key love it. I love that he is kind of holding this team to task, calling it into action, hopefully. And to me, it's sort of echoing upon what Goody said of, hey, there's a need for urgency here. He's saying, hey, you want urgency? And he's not, again, saying this word for word. You want some urgency? This is what we need. This is the shopping list. Get us a corner, get us a pass rusher, get us a number 1 wide receiver, and we're going to be cooking. I like it. To me, Josh Jacobs, by all accounts, all right, huge leader within the locker room, extremely respected within the locker room. I sincerely do not believe that he is going to ruffle any major feathers within the locker room. Maybe a quick conversation with a couple of the wide receivers or things like that. I don't think this is going to be any sort of issue. And if anything, I think it's laying a challenge for the wide receivers that are in that room. And I will just add this onto it as well, right? Wide receiver, corner, defensive end are the 3 things that he named. Corner, he knows that they're right now Eric Stokes and Corey Ballantyne are free agents, and is probably aware that Jair Alexander very likely will not be back. He's kind of just saying like, hey, we're probably going to need some replacements there. Defensive end or pass rusher, they lost Preston Smith midway through last year. And I get that they had some Brenton Cox, Aaron Mosby, etc. But going into the year last year, Preston Smith was expected to be a pretty big piece of that defensive front. They traded him away midway through the season. Again, you can kind of make the assumption of like, hey, we're going to need a replacement for that. And at wide receiver, you're losing Christian Watson for probably 13, 14, 15 games of the season coming up. You can kind of make the argument too, like we need a replacement for that. I do not take umbrage. I do not take offense. I do not take any sort of issue with what Josh Jacobs said at all. I think he's just, again, mostly just going and having fun football conversation. I don't think he's going to be disregarded in the locker room or anything like that for what he said. And if anything, I think he's kind of also challenging the organization of here's what we need, and kind of laying the gauntlet too for some of these young wide receivers. I thought the big key here was we've got a really young group of wide receivers. They can all be really, really, really special. But I think personally, we need a guy that's a proven number 1 already. So somebody that we know is going to be a little bit more consistent. And maybe that is a little bit of a call out for the current wide receivers. I think this has been a call out for the current wide receivers. Tom Brady said it when he was announcing the game of how, it wasn't a precise passing offense, and some of the routes, the depth and the cutoff points of the routes were not what they were supposed to be. And I think we saw that level of inconsistency. I think that was very apparent last year. I don't think that's news to anybody. Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, very inconsistent. Dobbs was not always the same week in and week out. Watson's now hurt. And Melton and Heath were kind of the same thing. It was a very, very, very inconsistent receiver room, with very young players that are still up and coming that we were all hoping were going to make a jump. And unfortunately, it just did not happen that way. So I'm cool with it. I'm cool with all of it. He then was asked about Davante Adams and kind of on a couple different occasions says, well, it's going to depend what it costs, which I think is a great answer. But he, you can tell they've maybe had a couple conversations about it. Kay Adams continues to do her best to try to get all these great players to Green Bay. A little bit of a hand in getting Xavier McKinney last year. Seems like she's trying to work on Davante this year. We'll see if she can get Davante back into Green Bay. I still think that makes sense. I think that gives you sort of that number one wide receiver. We did a full episode on it. So if you want to check that out, you can definitely go and do so. We talked about it at length as to why it would make sense, why it maybe wouldn't make sense, and why I think it actually is within the realm of possibility for Green Bay. Get reunited with Green Bay for Davante, get reunited with Davante if you're Green Bay, and then also get reunited with Josh Jacobs. I think there's a lot of reasons why that could potentially happen. However, he is still currently under contract as a member of the New York Jets. Josh Jacobs also went on to say that he's trying to recruit Max Crosby, Myles Garrett a little bit, just basically saying, we'd love to have you in Green Bay. He kind of said, hey, there's not much I can do, but he's laying the groundwork, just getting a little whisper in the ear. It's exactly what you want. This is what you want from your big time players. Whether Green Bay is a vacation destination or not, to quote former QB1, sometimes you need some recruiters out there. And if Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs are out there saying like, hey, I get it's Green Bay. We were free agents last year and we love it here. It's fantastic. The organization's great. Matt's great. Jordan's great. Come here. They're going to treat you well. Like that's going to go a long way. And yes, like usually there's those connections out there that are going to lead sometimes to those type of conversations. And maybe for Green Bay, by Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney or whoever else might be out there, having those talks and conversations, maybe it just gets Green Bay an audience with the player. There have been players in the past that are like, not going to Green Bay, not even talk to their agent and say, I don't even want to know if Green Bay calls, not going to Green Bay. And now maybe it just gets them, maybe it doesn't ultimately get them the player in the end, but maybe they weren't even going to talk to Green Bay. And now Green Bay's in on the conversation. And maybe Green Bay does have the opportunity to woo a player or two in that way because they are actually able to have that conversation and show them what Green Bay's all about, what the organization's about, how they would fit with the team. And sometimes that's all you need is just that sliver of an opportunity to get your foot in the door and to sign some of those key guys. So if we can get them some of that, if it plants a seed that could grow into something eventually of like, oh, okay, I will remember Green Bay come free agency. I wouldn't have normally thought about it, but you're speaking highly of it. You want me there? I'll at least have a conversation about it. Might lead to nothing, might lead to something, but I would much rather have Jacobs and McKinney and those guys out there trying to recruit. That seems a whole heck of a lot better to me than nothing. I'll take it. I'll absolutely take it. So I love that aspect of it. And then, of course, you had the Dontavian Wicks reaction. I guess Jaden Reed reacted to and then kind of deleted the tweet. It sounds like Jaden Reed was more upset with how fans were treating the receivers after Josh Jacobs said something, which I guess is a connotation of this as well. But the Wicks one was like 4 or 5 crying, laughing faces and then a thumbs down emoji. Anytime that it starts with 4 or 5 laughing emojis, I'm going to go ahead and assume it's not super serious. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I understand the thumbs down. I understand why the wide receivers in the room are probably not super loving the idea of going out and getting somebody that's going to upset the apple cart and go to the front of the line. If you're Wicks and Reed and Dobbs and the rest of those guys, you see Davante Adams come in or, whoever it might be, Chris Godwin, whomever, right? I don't think it's going to be T. Higgins, maybe a DK Metcalf. You see one of those guys come in and become the new number one. Well, that's not maybe the most comfortable thing in the world. It's maybe not what you're hoping for. And if you're Malik Heath or Bo Melton, now there's maybe one less spot open on that roster. So I can understand why maybe they don't like the overall connotation of it. But I know I talked about this on the Bleacher Report show, and I know Tom Grassi talked about it with Aaron Nagler as well. I love the challenge for the young wide receivers. All of these wide receivers had ample opportunity in 2024. And I mean ample opportunity this past season. The world was their oyster. If any of those guys wanted to go step up and show that they were even remotely worthy of being a true alpha number one wide receiver in the league, pretty much everyone, at least the top 4, right? Watson, Reed, Wicks, Dobbs really got that opportunity. They had the opportunity to showcase themselves. And for the most part, it left everyone a little bit underwhelmed, which is why this is a conversation in the first place. Had two of those guys, just two, had two of those guys went out and played incredibly well, up to what I think their potential could be, or even, maybe a step beyond that. We're nowhere near having this conversation. We're having a very similar conversation to what we had last offseason of, no, things are progressing nicely. You probably don't need to put resources in that room. But it didn't progress that way. Not to mention that you've had an ACL tear for Christian Watson, multiple concussions for Romeo Dobbs, a suspension for Romeo Dobbs. It did not go according to plan for the wide receiver core in 2024. So if Josh Jacobs wants to put a little bit of a line in the sand and challenge that group, all for that too. And I'll say it one more time. I don't have much concern that Josh Jacobs is going to now be this locker room cancer, or that people are not going to talk to him or go to him, or they're going to distrust him. He's going to probably be the same consummate professional that everyone in that locker room loves, and is going to be a leader next year as well. And I actually think that this is a little bit more of a form of leadership, if I'm being honest. So yeah, to me, challenge those wide receivers. I have no issue with it whatsoever. And I actually think that the Wicks reaction was, I'll just say it this way. When you see emojis, or whether it's a animated GIF or whatever it might be, I don't want to read too much into that. We might think we know what the connotation is, but it might be, when you get the 4 laughing emojis at the beginning, you might be like, man, Josh, will you stop messing around? Like, a thumbs down on that take, buddy. And it could be easily in, all love and all just joking around. And Jacobs knows exactly what Wicks is getting at when he says that. It could be a complete inside joke. Who knows? We don't know all of it. Or it could be like akin to, yeah, it's a clown take. I'm laughing at how stupid it is, and I'm giving you a thumbs down for the take. And I think when we, again, get in this realm of trying to interpret emojis, we get ourselves in a bit of a no man's land. Unless anyone's talked to Dontavian Wicks, we don't know exactly for sure how he's feeling. And I'll just add on top of that one more time. If Wicks is a little bit pissed off by it, I'm okay with that. I really am. Go out, prove him wrong. Prove that you have a core number one group of guys next year in 2025. I would love to see that. Josh would love to see that. The organization would love to see that. That's what we were hoping for in 2024. It didn't happen. So I think it's mostly much ado about nothing, but even if it lights a little bit of a fire, I'm all for lighting a little bit of a fire. No problem with that whatsoever. And I think that's, again, the big question, the big debate is, was Jacobs out of line? I think what probably in hindsight, and maybe LaFleur will have a conversation with him at some point about this, just to, kind of a side of like, hey, just in the future when this happens, doesn't need to be a big thing. Just to like, hey, we get this stuff all the time, not a big deal. But if you get this in the future, here's how you can kind of handle it, sort of thing. Instead of saying we need a number one wide receiver, if you say, I think we could use one more playmaker on offense, I think we could use, and he did say that the other two I thought were even like the defensive back one, right? We all knew he meant corner, but it's like, oh yeah, one more defensive back. Okay. It doesn't mean like, oh, we need a number one corner. So no, you need one more guy in the defensive back room. It's a lot softer, right? The difference between a real number one wide receiver and a DB, nobody in the corner room is reacting to be like, oh, you think we need a number one corner? Right? You just say, oh, no, we need another DB. Much softer, no reaction to that one, right? We need a real number one wide receiver is a different connotation. So I think if you say, hey, I think we need a playmaker, I think we need one more playmaker on offense. I think we need a one more pass rusher and one more defensive back. I think that would have been a little bit different, because pass rush could be defensive tackle or defensive end. Defensive back could be corner or safety. Playmaker could be running back, wide receiver, or tight end. I think that would probably have been a little bit softer, a little bit more, I think the point would have been taken still of like, yeah, that's exactly what they do need. Another playmaker, another pass rusher, another defensive back. Yeah, it checks out. But it's not calling on any one group of players. It's not calling on any one, player or anything like that of like, oh, that guy's not good enough. I think it would have been a little bit softer to do it that way. But I'll say one more time, I have no issue with it whatsoever. I think it again kind of echoes the, hey, if we're going to be urgent about this, Goody, these are the things that you can be urgent about. I think he's talking about the basic Packers needs that they have going into this offseason that everyone knows already. Josh Jacobs is certainly not breaking any news here. I don't think there's going to be any locker room issues from this whatsoever. So that's where I come down on the entire thing. I don't think he was out of line. I don't. Could have probably been a little bit different in the wording. That's the only thing I'll say. And again, if you're handling this from like a HR standpoint or something like that, just a quick conversation. Hey, here's how we could have probably changed just a couple words in there, make it sound the exact same point across, but with a little bit more generalization. Eases the fall a little bit. That's all I would say. And I will add one more piece of this. I think this was, for the most part, supposed to be, and in his mind, and kind of is, just completely innocuous. I think the overarching and the Wicks response and how we're responding to Wicks and all of that, I think is, again, we're probably just overreacting to everything at this point. That's what we do. It's what we do. I don't see any world in which we're going to go into mini camp and be like, oh man, these wide receivers do not like Josh Jacobs. There's a big falling out. They're going to have to figure out this problem. Just don't see it. Just don't see it. And that brings us to my one other topic for today. A little bit of social media chatter yesterday with myself. The wide receiver one conversation as a whole. I see this personally, and great minds can disagree. Stupid minds can disagree too, but hopefully great minds in this situation. I see this as a change in the wide receiver room over time. For example, going into the 2023 NFL draft, when they took LVN in that draft, so many people, myself included, were very aggressively wanting, top tier wide receiver. And Jackson Smith and Jigba was a name that I know for myself and a lot of other people wanted in the first round. They had Watson, they had Dobbs coming back, but there were some vacancies within that wide receiver room that needed to be filled. And there were a lot of people, again, myself included, who wanted them to add some pretty big wide receivers to that room, or even, again, going Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round. They didn't. They end up going with, and remember, like, Bill Melton was just a practice squad guy at that point. It was basically Watson and Dobbs. And then they ultimately end up adding in the second round, Jaden Reed, in the fifth round, Dontavian Wicks, in the seventh round, Grant Dubose, and then as an undrafted free agent, Malik Heath. They had 3 wide receivers in the draft, an undrafted free agent. Dubose does not make the team. Heath does. And then Reed and Wicks go on to have great seasons. Watson was once again oft injured. Dobbs went off in the playoffs, looked fantastic. And we got through 2023, and the wide receiver room looked set. They have Watson as your deep guy. You've got Dobbs as the possession guy, Reed as the slot guy, Wicks as the route runner, the guy who can separate, get open, has some run after the catch ability. You have Melton as a sort of gadgety kind of Jaden Reed backup that can do a little bit of everything. A little bit of a deep threat, a little bit of a gadget, like not great at anything, but really solid piece, and showed that he could really do some impressive stuff in 2023. And Malik Heath too. Like, there was still some promise there as well. It wasn't necessarily like Malik Heath was going to become a true number one, but you looked at the group as a whole, and you had all different types. You had all young guys, everyone that was either going to be in their second or third year, everyone the arrow was pointed up on. And you looked at it, and if you would have added a big time wide receiver in 2024, you would have probably had, you're thinking, all right, well, you're probably going to have to cut one of those guys. They already had to cut Grant Dubose, who was worthy of getting a roster spot. You're going to have to cut one of those guys. You had limited resources. I don't think you wanted to take money away from Josh Jacobs or Xavier McKinney to go get a wide receiver. It wasn't a great wide receiver free agent class. And from a draft standpoint, you're probably looking at really one guy, Ladd McConkey, in the first round that they had the opportunity to get instead of Jordan Morgan. You could make that argument. I'll understand it. I don't know of anybody at the time. I'm sure there's somebody, maybe it was you, but I don't know of anyone at the time that was calling for Ladd McConkey to Green Bay in the first round last year. You have a finite amount of resources, and putting a bunch of money into a room that looked like it was progressing in a great way seemed uber silly at the time. So I steadfastly disagreed with any thought going into the season that they needed a number one wide receiver. And I think that was the right call based on what we knew at the time without the benefit of hindsight, and knowing that you had all these wide receivers that were set to progress this upcoming year. With another year in the offense, with Jordan playing even, hopefully, ideally what you're thinking even better, it was set up perfectly. The money that they spent on McKinney and Jacobs made sense. They move on obviously from Aaron Jones, and when they get when they get Jacobs, and then they go through the draft, and you're not really looking at any of those rounds thinking, oh, we need a young wide receiver to add to it. Just wasn't the biggest need at the time. And I'll say one more time, you have a finite amount of resources that you can use. I don't know what resource they really could have or should have used instead on a wide receiver than what they did. And that was kind of my point back at the time. And now things have changed. You have your entire core of wide receivers, all 6 of them, at minimum, did not take a step last year. Maybe Watson at times looked like he took a small. I would actually still say that's kind of the Christian Watson when healthy that we've seen. When he's been healthy, he's been good his entire career since his rookie year. Just hasn't been healthy all that often. So I would actually argue, I don't think he took a major step. I thought Reed early on looked like he was about to, and then fell off as the rest of the season went along. Wicks took a step back. Melton took a step back. Heath certainly did not take a step forward. I thought Dobbs took a step back. You had all of that happen. The wide receiver as a core as a whole, 6 guys collectively took a step backwards, if not a couple steps backwards. I don't think you knew that was coming in 2024 going into the year. In addition, you've got Romeo Dobbs suspended, conduct detrimental to the team. One of the least things I would have expected last year. You have 2 big-time concussions for Romeo Dobbs. You have a torn ACL for Christian Watson. The calculus has changed. It's different. Right now, the wide receiver room feels night and day different in February 6, 2025 than it did going into free agency and the draft in 2024. Night and day different. So to me, Green Bay's process in 2024 was good, not to mention that you needed to give the space and the air and the opportunity for those young wide receivers to really spread their wings and grow and to become those next great wide receivers. Just like James Jones, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, we can go on and on. Just like those players had the opportunity to do, at some point, you got to go out and do it. You got to get the reps. You got to get the snaps. That's what Green Bay was doing this past year, giving Reed and Watson and Dobbs and Wicks, and to a lesser extent, Melton and Heath, the opportunity to go out and spread their wings, to get better, to show the growth, to get those reps that they needed to become those star wide receivers. Unfortunately, brick wall did not happen. Major steps backwards, injuries, suspensions, concussions, all of it. And you end up in a totally different world 1 year later. And I'll add on top of that by saying I still have a lot of faith in this wide receiver core. Watson's injury sucks. If it was just everyone coming back, I'd feel a lot different about it. Watson's injury hurts it. That's a huge piece of this. Double concussions for Dobbs is another piece of it. But I still think that Wicks, Reed, Dobbs, Watson, I think, probably, to some extent, I think you're probably getting some young players in to compete with Bo Melton and Malik Heath at this point. But I still have a lot of faith in those wide receivers. But they're going to have to play better. And you're now to the point of like, hey, I think you're going to play better. I want you to play better. But I also know that, to Josh Jacobs' point, you need probably somebody to stabilize that room a little bit. Veteran in the room, maybe mentor some of those younger guys that can also get you what you need in some of those key moments. Be a man-to-man beater, which Green Bay really struggled with a season ago. Be somebody who can stretch the field with Christian Watson out. That's what you're looking. I'll say one more time, the calculus has changed. I will readily admit, I thought Dontavian Wicks was going to take a big step. Didn't. I'll take the L on that wholeheartedly. Jaden Reed, I thought, was going to be at minimum where he was last year, and I thought he would take a pretty significant step. Didn't. I'll take the L on that as well. I think Dobbs was mostly Dobbs. And I didn't know that. I didn't think there was this huge breakout coming for Dobbs, but I thought it was possible. Watson, again, is such a tough eval just because of the consistent injuries and not being able to stay on the field. It's just been tough, and you could kind of expect that going into the year. That one you could, theoretically see coming a little bit more. Maybe not the torn ACL, but some of the injury stuff. I thought Melton was going to be much better than that. I'll gladly take the L on that as well. Just say I got those, I guess, evals wrong. But I don't think the eval of Green Bay not going with wide receivers in totality because of the depth and talent that they had at the position. I don't think it was wrong in hindsight, but I don't think it was wrong at the time. I think the process was good. The result ended up not being what you wanted it to be. And again, you can easily disagree on it. I understand that there was some hope, conjecture, whatever you want to call it, of like what those wide receivers would be, but you also saw it be successful. In the season before, in the second half of the season, specifically against the Cowboys, you saw those wide receivers cook. You saw them play great football. And to think that everyone would kind of take that step back, I don't think was realistic at the time as you were going into the year. And again, you only have a finite amount of resources. That's where I see it. I think the calculus has changed. I think the suspensions, the injuries, and everything. And the last thing I'll say in regards to this is, like, there was the comment of, well, it's now just because Josh Jacobs is saying it. Now everyone's just jumping on the bandwagon. Again, no. We went through this, I forget how many, it was 2-3 weeks ago. Wide receiver was on that list. A premium wide receiver is what we said at the time. This has been the conversation for everyone. So I don't think this is any change based on what Josh Jacobs has said. We've all basically been having these same conversations. It's why we went over a Devontae Adams, scouting report where he's at. T. Higgins. We're going to go over Chris Godwin. We're going to, of course, look at all the top wide receivers in the draft. Ross just had Egbuka on talking about him today as to why he could be taken in the first round. This has been known. This has been something that we've been talking about. I don't think the calculus changed at all based on anything that Josh Jacobs said. And that's why I thought overall his comments were pretty innocuous. It's kind of what we all knew, probably what most in the organization knew. And if anything, if anyone's offended the wide receivers, light that fire underneath those guys. Probably what they need. A little bit of fire, a little bit of passion, a little bit of intensity, a little bit of urgency. It's going to be the word of the offseason, urgency. Goody said it. Josh Jacobs laid the foundation for a little bit more urgency as well. And I, for one, absolutely love it. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate it. Thank you so much for the support. I'll be back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. You know it, 365 days a year. Shout out to our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wayne, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Wong, Arnaldo Espinoza, Peter Ritaka, Jay Zimmerman, B. Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Gesford, Step Key, Dylan Pat Scott, Bobby Santoro, SoCal Pack, Chris Rager, Izzy Robertson, Ian Ewing. See you guys soon, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.